I think the biggest thing for me, and I've talked about it a lot today, is choice and being able to give people a few options that make sense for them and allow them to participate in that pricing conversation and surface it as early as you can.
Coffee's for closers only.
So we've established my proposal is sound in principle. Now we're just haggling over price.
Let's see how much we're going for on eBay.
Man, it's the same as Dunkin' Donuts. Costs 15 times the price.
Welcome to Impact Pricing, the podcast where we discuss pricing, value, and the unbreakable relationship between them. I'm Mark Stiving, and today our guest is Bill Wilson. Here are 3 things you want to know about Bill before we start. He is co-founder and CEO of SalesRight, a company that's focused on B2B SaaS pricing. Boy, that feels good. He spent most of his career in software development and management, and in 2007, he founded MindSea Development, an app creation company that's created very popular apps, and the company's still running today with Bill as chairman of the board. Welcome, Bill.
Hi, Mark. Super great to be here. Happy to chat about pricing. Let's do it.
Me too. How did you get into pricing? You went from apps to pricing?
Well, yeah, it was kind of a natural progression. So when I first started, it's funny because if you've got to sell something, you've got to figure out pricing and packaging, right? So when I first started MindSea, it was an agency, and it still is. And we sold services kind of on a cost of goods sold basis, right? So we figured out how much it would cost us to do it. We'd mark it up and we'd sell it, right? The classic, consulting kind of model. We put a lot of time into figuring out how much projects should cost and, how to present it to our prospects and all the rest of it. But what we found is that we'd get into these late stage deals and we weren't closing them, right? And so I started to think about how we were actually presenting and pricing things, and I did a bunch of reading and research as a typical technical guy I am, and we switched to a more value-based model around our pricing, and started giving people more options and a few more choices, but started taking away the conversation about hours and, how long is that going to take and all the rest of it. And we started selling things more in a packaged way. And that was sort of my real introduction into the pricing space, because I realize now that it's basically the core of pretty much everything. One of the surefire ways you want to you want to increase your revenue, raise your prices. And then how do you go about doing that? All of the pricing and context around that. So that's how I got into it. So it was sort of a requirement as I grew the business.
I have to say that I did not expect that answer, but I absolutely loved it. That was fabulous. Companies who struggle, or people who have that epiphany that says, oh, we could go from cost plus to charging how much value we deliver to our customers. Whoa, what an epiphany. That is awesome. So if I were to ask you your biggest mistake in pricing, would it be all of the cost plus time, or do you have a bigger mistake?
There's 2 things. So I've often been raised with this idea, do whatever it takes, right, to get the job done. And oftentimes that leaked into my business. So I would, and it's not bad, but I would get into conversations around pricing with myself. And I would talk myself down, right? So we'd sit down and do a cost plus model on a big app build, and we'd come up with a number, and we're like, it's X dollars. And we'd look at each other, there's me and a couple of us at the beginning, and we look at each other and goes it can't be this much. There's just no way, right? Why is it costing this much? So then we would trim it down. We go, look, the prospects they're never going to go for this. And then, so we would cut it down, and then we'd go back and we'd present it again. Or present it for the first time, and they would have sticker shock even on our already reduced price. And then we found ourselves reducing it more. And it's sort of that confidence in your pricing and knowing what you're worth. And so know what you're worth and charge it is a really big, that's a big thing in that space. You've got to be confident that what you're doing is worth the money. So that's probably my biggest mistake. I remember doing a deal. I'm going to embarrass myself here. I think it was a $150,000 deal. We took it down to 110 or something, and we went to them, and then we ended up doing for 70. And then we get into it and realize that it's way bigger than it ever should have been anyways. And I think we ended up spending we were so underwater on that deal. It wasn't funny. So that's probably one of my biggest mistakes. So it is that time period of doing the cost of goods sold.
Yeah. And the two lessons I would pull out of that, which I think you just expressed, was number one, we often don't have confidence in our prices and in our ability to close the deal. But the second lesson, which I really like, is once you shift to value-based pricing, now all of a sudden I understand the value to the client, and I can communicate that in the sales process when I'm delivering whatever that price is. It could have been $150K, but I'm delivering $500,000 worth of value. Why wouldn't you pay that?
Right. And we found that as we went along, and also switching to that value-based model really let us experiment with some of that pricing. Like, because then we could really easily just say, well, this package that we've been selling for, I don't know, $8,500 for all this time, let's try and sell it for $12,500. Let's are we giving them that much value? Because everybody says, like, they look at it and they're like, wow, that's a lot of value for $8,500. First clue, Captain Obvious, right. Captain Obvious over here. But those kinds of conversations. So it's been an amazing vehicle for us to. It's doubled our deal sizes. Like at MindSea, nice. Before I started SalesRight at MindSea, like that was the effect of switching to a value-based pricing model.
Nice. Okay, so tell us about SalesRight. What do you guys do there?
So we focus on late stage deals in SaaS. So specifically around pricing conversations.
Wait, what's a late stage deal?
So from that time when you've already had your conversation, so a typical SaaS sales process looks something like most companies will have 2 or 3 tiers on their website that you can pick from, punch in your credit card and get started. But there's often, like 70% of those companies or some metric like that have a custom or enterprise tier. So you have to talk to sales. And that process looks like, you're talking to a BDR, the BDR is doing some minor qualification, you get handed to an account executive, and from there you do a demo, and then eventually you get to this pricing conversation. So by the time you get to that pricing conversation, you're pretty well, where you are from the prospect's point of view, that you're interested. From the salesperson's point of view, you've communicated value. And now you're in that stage where you're doing some negotiation. You usually put a proposal together at this stage. And then you go through this whole back and forth. And that's where I think things are busted. For me, that's where I thought things were really broken. Was what was end up happening is that people would get sent a PDF or an email with one price in it, like one option. It's like, this is what you told me. This is what I think you need. And here's how much it costs. So now I'm left wanting, right? As a prospect, I'm sitting there going, well, what if I wanted to do this? Or what if I wanted to do that? I want to be able to explore some options. It's crazy, right? Because we all want to choose our own destiny, right? We all want to participate in that. We're savvy buyers. People have been buying on the internet now for a couple of decades. We're all used to it. We buy based on trust and all the rest of these things. And yet here I'm dealing with a salesperson we've switched away from a model where you've given me tons of choice on your website to this model where I feel like I'm buying a used car. That's where I was seeing a problem. And that's where I thought what we had been doing at MindSea could be really applicable for that SaaS space, because they already understand value-based pricing and packaging. Right. They're already there. But inside that late stage deal, instead of sending off, a PDF or, recycled PowerPoint presentations, you're sending off an interactive pricing guide that's been configured for them. It's got their name on it. It's using their language. It presents a package for them that makes sense for them, but also allows them to explore other options.
So this is sounding really interesting. First off, is this a software package that you've written, or is this a process that you teach?
It's a software as a service model, and there is elements of teaching in it, but generally it is a software as a service. It's a sales enablement tool for those late stage deals. So when you're at that stage and you're ready to talk about pricing, you use this instead of sort of proposals or quotes.
Okay, so we go through the 20 different features or 100 different features that are possible, and I could give you different quantities of different features and different capabilities. In the old days, I would have said, oh, here's how much of which feature you need. Here's your price. Here's your PDF file.
Yep. So now you do the same thing. You listen to them, you understand their pain, and you try and put together a package that makes sense for them. But instead of you typing a number and saying you need 25 users, you set the slider to be 25 users and then let them play some what if analysis with that. They can slide it up and down. They can pick different user amounts. They could pick, or whatever the variability is in your deals. And that's the challenge, right? Often in SaaS, you're selling platforms, right? You're selling platforms, and platforms have different features. So you've got a platform fee. You often have a per user fee or some other variable fee. You've got add-ons and other things that they need to be able to configure. So you're just trying to make that a bit more interactive, right? So that they can actually see how the pricing's derived. And, ultimately what I'm trying to do is change the question from, given that sort of single option aversion approach, where you've got, here's your single option. I'm probably not going to buy from you at all. My question now is yes or no. So if I can give you a few options, then I'm changing that conversation from, am I going to buy from you to what am I going to buy from you? And I think as a seller, I'm in a much better position if I can do that. It's like walking into the car dealership and you're to the point where you're picking out the leather color and the trim, on that little configurator. They know that you're pretty far down the process. So it's the same type of thing. We want them to be comparing us against ourselves, right? We don't want them off comparing against other competitors and things like that.
How's the podcast going? Are you getting value? Research shows that people don't really value what they get for free. But I'm hoping you'll prove this research wrong. Please demonstrate to us and the entire world that you value this podcast. Would you please pause the podcast, subscribe if you haven't already done so, rate the podcast, and leave us a short review? You'd be doing a huge favor. And research shows if you invest this little bit of time, you'll probably like the podcast even more. Win-win. Pause. Do it now. We'll wait for you.
I love this concept, but you've heard of the paradox of choice before?
Yes. Yeah.
Let me tell a quick little story, if I may. I have a custom-made titanium bicycle from a company called Seven. Before I bought the bike, they sent me this questionnaire of, there's 3-4 pages of how do you ride and how stiff do you want it and how blah. And I was scared to death that I was going to buy the wrong bicycle because I didn't know what I needed. It's like, just tell me what I need and send me that, would you please? And I could see if you gave me too many choices, I couldn't decide.
Yeah. And that's really where the education piece comes in around how to actually structure your pricing. I've seen people with like 5 or 6 variables, and it's too much, right? I think the best way you can do it, like you've got to pick your value metric, right? In SaaS, like what is it people are going to pay you for? What is the biggest value they get from it? And charge them as they use more of it. In some cases, in a lot of enterprise software, that's per seat. So how many noses are using the software? That's how you charge, because that seems to be where they're getting the most value. So that means they're growing and therefore you're growing, and they can figure out how to allocate that cost. But it might be something else. But if you have too many of those, it can get very complicated, necessarily complicated in some instances. You may need to have some of that complexity. But yes, it is about trying to simplify those models down to a point where you don't have so much variability. And the same thing with, people putting out 5 tiers of a service. Seriously, I have to make a decision between 5 things? Like I can't do that. I can do 3, right? Or you can do that whole extremeness aversion approach where you put, you set up guardrails of like a really ridiculous package on the low end and a really outlandish package on the high end. And you just know nobody's going to be in there and they're just sort of funneling themselves towards the middle. And you see that a lot on B2C SaaS sites, where there's like, the $0 plan, but you're super limited. You can't do anything. Like no one's really going to use that. That's basically a trial. So, that extremeness aversion approach.
So I could see this working well. By the way, when I read some of your literature and I looked at some of what you did, I didn't get that impression. I could see that if you gave me 2 pricing metrics, right? So it's going to be users and it's going to be downloads, or it's going to be users and it's going to be clicks, or right, there's 2 pricing metrics that I'm playing with. I could see that making a lot of sense. But I also see customers saying, oh, but I don't want to pay for that feature because I'm not going to use it. Mm-hmm. And then the client or the salesperson saying, okay, we'll take that out and give you a discount. And so it's that, God, it's not an easy problem that you're trying to solve.
No, it really isn't. And I think that's why it's so interesting. Like I think at that stage, like if you have the custom, or I should say the self-serve options, like that's going to fit a big chunk of your users. But the reason someone's picked this custom tier is because they do need something special, right? Or they are big enough that they're going to have some kind of incentive-based pricing. They know that when they click that button, and that's why SaaS companies have inside sales teams that are there to service those, and they have to figure out how best to package those things. And we've heard from customers where I was talking to someone today and he said, I have 5 proposals out to the same person. It's these things where people are like, well, what if I want the full Cadillac of things? And oh, what if I want this? And what if I want that? And the medium they're using to communicate it doesn't allow them to express the complexity that they need to express. Or at least I should say that's the wrong approach. I should say it's not the complexity. It's that it is complex and they need to present it in a simplified manner and their tools don't support that. So how do you present those complex models in a more simplistic way you can visually take in? It's like you're on Apple's website and you're comparing MacBook Pros, right? And you do the comparison thing and you get the side-by-side comparison. It's like, oh, this one weighs a quarter of a pound less. And this one, know, like you can start to make your decisions because you're looking at it visually as opposed to jumping back and forth between the different specs. So I think there's a lot to be done in that space. And it is a complicated problem. And the more we can help people simplify that custom piece, the more we can really understand the things that drive our buyers to buy. Right? Because we have those metrics about what worked and what didn't. And we can really start to experiment and see where our pricing can go.
What do you mean we have those metrics? What metrics are we talking about here?
So on the back end of SalesRight, every time you send one of our guides, our pricing guides to a prospect, we're tracking what they click on and what they look at. So you can see what the value of the deal going up and down. You can actually see what tiers they're picking and what they're not, which features they're sort of trying to dig into and get more information about. So you can actually have a bit more of a sense of what's important to them. Because during discovery and during qualification, we get as much information as we can, and we should know what's important to our prospects. But there's nothing like them telling you by actually interacting with the pricing and they're looking at some scenarios that you didn't think of. And that's the kind of metrics I'm talking about. Understanding how they buy.
Oh, that's really fascinating. I'm playing this through in my mind. If you were to send me one of those, probably what I would do is I know I would go look at things I didn't know anything about. And so those may be things I don't care about, but I looked at them anyway. Mm-hmm. But I would probably end on the thing that I think is best for me.
Yep.
Even if I don't call you and tell you that I think that's best for me.
Yeah, and I agree. And that's what we see. People leave it in the state that they think is the right place for them because they've put some cognitive load into thinking about this problem. And they want a bit of ROI on that. Subconsciously want some ROI on anything that we put thought into. As soon as they start playing with a slider and they see those numbers going up and down, like they're in control. That feels pretty great. They can really put together the package they want. Like you said, like for you, if someone said to you from 7, they're like, look, based on your riding style and what I know about you, here's the bike I think that's right for you. But you're like, no, I get that you want me to have a stiff suspension, but I think I want a bit of a softer ride. Then you could play with that. But most everything is already set for you. And that probably would have been a much better buying experience for you and probably better for them.
Would have taken the angst out of the decision.
Right. This is it. So take the angst, build some trust, lets you be in control, but you feel like the person on the other end has your back and understands what you need.
I want to push back just a little bit on some things you talked about. You were saying the extreme low, the extreme high, and then the one in the middle. I often think good, better, best. And I think good and best both have a really good purpose, more than just putting in guardrails. It's because I've thought about what would really price-sensitive people need to be somewhat productive, but it's not what most people want. And the best is the same thing, right? What would people who aren't price-sensitive, what would they really like to have if they could? But most people aren't going to buy that.
Right.
And so it's me understanding my buyers, my users, which is not hugely different than what you're just talking about here.
No, yeah, and I can see that. And that is probably a better way of putting that, because you're not going to put together a package that doesn't give someone zero value. And you're not going to put together a package that puts such a high price tag on little value, right? So yes, I think, that's probably a better way of articulating that.
Yeah. Okay. We're coming up on time and there's still a topic I really want to talk to you about. I understand you have an opinion on sales compensation plans. At one point in my life, I was a salesperson. This concept of moving from on-prem or a traditional business model where I get all my money up front and I can pay my salesperson a commission on that deal to selling SaaS. How do we compensate salespeople for SaaS sales?
Yeah, this is a really interesting topic and something that I've done a bunch of reading on, and it's really complicated and really tough. The current thing I'm looking at the most is about the tip of the spear type salespeople and how to compensate those people. So there's a couple models you can use. The ones I've seen are, there's lots of variables you can use inside a compensation plan. But some of the best advice I received was like, there are probably a dozen that you could use, but pick 2. Like, again, almost like the thing we were talking about, the whole, paradox of choice, right? Giving people too many options inside their comp plan is too many things to focus on. Right. So I think the 2 big things are alignment. So we want to align our salespeople with what matches their goals and what matches the business goals. And I don't think you can do that with one number. Some of the models I've seen are, you got a base, of course, and then you move to, for if it's a BDR, for example, you're looking at paying them a kicker for every meeting that's booked. So that incents them to book more meetings, right? Which is great. And on its own would be terrible for the business, because if I'm getting just paid on booking more meetings, I'm just going to book meetings all day that you don't care about. And then
mom wants a meeting.
Yeah, exactly. So then on the other side of that equation is how you align the business. And that would be with, for example, a percentage of ACV, right? So you give them a percentage of the deals that they're closing. And so that incents them to make sure that those meetings they're setting up are actually ICP, they're ideal customer profiles of the people that you should be talking to. So that's one compensation plan that I've seen advertised and working, in various organizations. And it's really simple for everybody to understand.
So let me ask about that, because ACV, average customer value, that's what you meant, right?
Average contract value.
Average contract value. Yeah. So the deal, a contract.
Or annual contract value, if you like. So basically, if I sell a SaaS deal and it's an annualized basis, it's a 6K deal, maybe I get 5% of that deal. I think the big one in SaaS that you talked about, I think about getting your commission upfront, is the same way I approach SaaS commissions. If someone sells a deal, don't dribble in their commission every month as you get paid. Pay them the commission upfront. They've got to eat, and they've got to see the upside. And if there's a deal that is sliding sideways and they churn out in 6 months, well, you just claw it back off a future deal. You don't, it requires a bit of, accounting magic, but you can make it work. And I think it gives the upside in the right place for the salesperson, incentivizes them correctly, and also incentivizes them to not bring in people who are going to churn out, right? Good clients that see value.
So the 1 year, I've seen clients compensate based on, we're assuming it's a 3-year contract,
right?
Even though you only booked a 1-year contract. And that's because we've got great customer success people. We know the lifetime value of the customer is going to be beyond 3 years, at least most customers. And so we still give them a good chunk. What do you think of something like that?
I mean, I guess it really depends on how you feel about your churn. If you're selling enterprise deals and you're expecting 3 years out of the minimum and you've got negative churn, seems like a pretty good gamble. But if you're not, and you still have 5% churn, over 3 years, that's a lot of customers out the door. So, I don't know. I wouldn't do it.
Yeah. I think the real problem with this whole compensation is the fact that we have revenue over time. We have lifetime value of customer. And it just isn't, I got the sale. Here's the chunk of the revenue that we just pulled in. So,
yeah. I mean, at renewal times, maybe there's also a kicker there. Every renewal, you could do some compensation there. I mean, that's where customer success comes in as well. Because customer success teams these days are, a bit of a hybrid of, solution experts and salespeople. Their job is to make sure you're growing with the software, which really results in expansion revenue for you, which is much cheaper than going off and getting new revenue. Yep. So, those people need to be compensated on that as well. So it's very
absolutely. Bill, this has just been fascinating, but I have to end with the most important question I ask all day. What's one piece of pricing advice you would give our listeners that you think could have a big impact on their business?
I think the biggest thing for me, and I've talked about it a lot today, is choice, and being able to give people a few options that make sense for them and allow them to participate in that pricing conversation and surface it as early as you can.
That was fascinating or fabulous, right? I think everybody should have a choice. Bill, thank you so much for your time today. If anyone wants to contact you, how can they do that?
You can get me on Twitter at WDR Wilson or SalesRight Co.
SalesRight Co.
Yeah, SalesRight
Excellent.
CO. Yep.
Episode 34 in the can. Let's see, my favorite part today had to be talking about sales compensation because I've just been so lost and confused on that topic. What was your favorite part? Please let us know in the comments of wherever you downloaded and listen. And while you're at it, would you please give us a 5-star review? They're very helpful to us. If you have any questions or comments about the podcast or about pricing in general, feel free to email me at mark@impactpricing.com. Now, go make an impact.